Welcome to the Simply Real Life podcast. I'm Sarah, the founder of Simply Real Health, here to help you simplify, amplify, and elevate your life. This show is for those of you who want the real talk on how to live a more intuitive and intentional life, a life that's healthy from the inside out, and one that feels more effortless, aligned, simple, and more alive. We cover it all, from health, wellness, mindset, motherhood, daily habits and rituals, to business and relationships, creativity and growth, and tiny tricks to feeling your best, and the energetics behind it all filled with personal stories, unfiltered conversations, and of course, answering all of your burning questions, all in the way of simplicity and keeping it real, so that you can create your own version of your healthiest life. Let's do it. Hello, you guys. Welcome back to the show. So I've got a deeply personal one this week, and one that is kind of intimate, really. It's a little bit funny to think about sharing this with the entire world, but I also know deep down that this is something that I do want to share, and I do want to talk about a little bit more, because after I did share, I have never had so many messages come to my DMs after I shared about it. And so this is the story and the journey behind my process of both discovering that I had the diagnosis of PCOS, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then the process that it took for me to actually heal that and feel like it's not something that I ever really think about anymore. So let me back up before we jump into these details, that this, of course, is not medical advice. This is just me sharing my own journey behind this longer process than what I thought it would be to slowly start to bring my hormones to a place where they were fully optimized. And in the previous episode that I talked about on this topic of hormones and getting them to function at their highest, most optimal level, that is the place where I started first. So if you have not listened to that episode, that was my headspace, even like a year or two before thinking about having kids. I knew that hormones played such a big part. There was nothing wrong or feeling off to my hormones at that point. But I just knew I have this intention in my life and this vision that I had of having a family. I didn't know when I would be ready, but I knew that it was something down the road that I really wanted. And so I wanted to make sure that I was doing all the things that I could do that were in my control to slowly walk myself to that place of being ready mentally, but most importantly, probably physically. That would be the place I would start. That's where I talk about, the different changes I made to my food and even in my mentality. And it wasn't until we were actually ready to start trying for kids that I got this surprise diagnosis of PCOS. And PCOS stands for polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I say that it was a surprise because usually the symptoms for that are being significantly overweight, that you have been for a long time, that you have extremely high levels of testosterone. So you get odd hair growth patterns or excessive hair growth, really have problems managing blood sugar. There's just a lot of different factors that I was like, that's not me. But the last symptom is long cycles, a little bit longer than normal cycles. And so I think up until the point of maybe the year before we were getting ready to try, my cycles since getting off the birth control pill were always very normal. But I think now looking back, as I shared in the previous episode, the things that were going on at the time when my cycle started to get a little strange, a little bit longer, and then it was a little bit hard to predict how long it would be, came after this highly stressful period in my life. And looking back now, of all the different things I have come across or have been presented to me as health challenges, let's say, all things that I have then healed from, whether that has been with SIBO or that was with hyperthyroid problems, all of these things that I have healed and fixed, I can see looking back now that those things came on right after a time of really high stress or high intensity in my life. And so this was around the time, I keep talking about this time, but this season, I guess, really did a number for me on my body. But writing the first cookbook, it is something that I do not regret. It's the thing I'm the most proud of that I have done in my business. But also looking back now, I can see the implications that it has had on my health in particular. And it just is fascinating, I think, to connect. So just something to note not only am I going to talk about the physical things that I was noticing, but where was I at mentally? What things were going on in my life? What sort of stressors or big things or big projects? And so that's kind of where I started noticing that there was a little bit of a difference. And like I shared in the other episode, that wasn't necessarily a stage where I had to be really intensely taking care of my health and deeply thinking about hormones. That shift only started to happen after that cookbook came out and after I got married. So it was sort of this longer progression. And like I said before, I didn't really think much of it. I just thought I had longer cycles. And that really wasn't an issue until I started thinking about tracking my cycle and therefore trying to track ovulation, which was something that I started to do. I'm just being honest and sharing this, something I started to do probably a full year before we even were going to approach the topic of starting a family. So that's how planned out. I know this is a big, important piece. And that is something I would encourage you to do. That if you just maybe got diagnosed with PCOS, or you're maybe wondering what's going on, my hormones are feeling a little off and I'm noticing a few different symptoms, but I'm not really sure what to do. I think just starting as soon as possible this process of healing, because sometimes it takes a little while. I think it truly does take the body, especially when we're talking about something inflammatory based, which PCOS can be, or if it's blood sugar based or anything that's cellularly going on in your health. It takes a little bit of time, like at least a couple months for your body to start to heal, to start to trust that you're doing some things to help support it better, just like a piece of advice that nobody asked for. But starting to think through some of these things, especially as you're healing, going into the process of healing with a mentality that this is for the long term and it may take some time. And it's not about this quick fix where even within like a week or two, you'll start to notice rapid differences. But especially for women, it just takes time. Like our cycles are 28 days around there, and it takes an entire month for us to move through each of those different phases of the cycle, therefore each of the different phases of our hormones, etc. Like I said, this diagnosis that came, and I use that in air quotes because, well, I'll talk about that piece later, but this diagnosis that came of PCOS came because I was doing all of the things that I talked about in that first episode, like changing my food, reducing caffeine, thinking about eating more fiber, thinking about making sure I have a lot of healthy fat in my diet, thinking about incorporating protein and drinking a little bit less. Not that it was ever crazy, but just a little bit less and a little bit more mindfully. So doing all those things, I still was noticing I feel good, I feel normal, but my cycles are just a little bit long. So because I knew that I was headed into the season of wanting to get pregnant, I talked with my naturopath and she said, if this is something that you've actively been working and trying to really get yourself boosted and it's not working, let's just schedule an ultrasound. That way you know what you're working with, then we can take more advanced steps from there. So I remember going in, and this is right when we were getting ready to try. And I remember going in and thinking like, I wonder, maybe something's off. If something's off, I want to know as soon as I can. And the results came back that there was little cysts on one of my ovaries. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, the significance of that and which side it was on and why I think it's all connected. The diagnostic testing came back and showed if you have cysts on your ovaries, like they usually do diagnose that if you have that plus one of the other symptoms. So problems losing weight, issues with your blood sugar, pre-diabetic, any of those things. So my only symptom was long cycles. And then they showed a little bit of those little polyps on the ovary. So after finding that out, I remember coming home crying, like feeling so defeated and sad and feeling like it was going to be impossible to get pregnant. And what they did share with me is that because it was on one side, that the chances of getting pregnant were going to be very slim because it alternates which side the ovary releases the egg, and you don't know which side it's coming from every month. So it could be 6 months where it's going on the right side, and then it could randomly switch to the left side. So it was very unpredictable. That's when I got very serious about, okay, which path am I going to choose to take with this? Because I know in the past when I have dealt with anything with my health, knowing and thinking about where you're going in the future and really believing that you can heal is the most important thing for me. that has been the thing that has made the biggest difference, because it would be so easy to get some sort of diagnosis where you're clinically labeled with something and fully take that on as your identity. But I think the biggest difference for me was really not taking that on. I'm not really even going to identify as having PCOS. This is what the test showed, but I also fully believe that my body is capable of healing. And you have to really start to believe that and integrate that, because I didn't at first. And I was so sad and discouraged. And I just remember just crying to Kyle, being like, I don't know if we're going to be able to have kids on our own. We may need help or assistance with it. And he's like, you know what, though? If anybody can heal this, it's you. Think of how much that you already know. Think of how much that if you have this, how much down the road you're going to be able to help other people. And that just gives me chills. And that's the reason why I'm recording this, even though it's taken me years to do so, because it was so overwhelming, I think, at that moment. And especially with fertility or pregnancy, or just in that tender season of life of thinking, what if, and how are we going to get there? And it's just so all encompassing. Your entire heart, it's all about your own physical body. It's where your thoughts are going. It's everything all at once. I gave myself 2 days and then of being sad and feeling discouraged and, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I then had a moment, which I think is where the difference was starting to happen. Where the change actually started was in that moment when I said, okay, I see the facts. I see what's going on. However, I believe that I'm going to heal this. And there are so many studies, by the way, that are done about this process of what you actually believe to be true. The thoughts that you think turn into the beliefs that you have. So if you're walking around feeling like I'm broken, I'm sick, this is not going to work, I have this diagnosis, what's the point? That energy is not healing energy. That is not going to get your body in the state of like, okay, we can do this. And I know that for some of you that may seem wild and a little bit out there, but I will tell you that I think this is the biggest difference, is continually practicing the thoughts of what you actually want to create, of what you actually envision for yourself, versus taking something which is maybe what is done in typical society, or typically when people hear news like that. Okay, I'll follow along, I'll take medication. And I was open to all those things, but I wanted to try giving it my best go first. If I had that attitude and that energy of my body can heal, and I trust it and I believe in it and I know that I can do this. So I would spend some time, like almost every morning in that season of life, where I would sit down and I would close my eyes and call it meditating, call it envisioning, call it manifesting. I would put my hands right on my ovaries and I would imagine this golden healing light coming in and taking away things. I'd imagine like cobwebs. I was like, okay, let's infuse it with life and goodness and energy. This may seem really out there for some of you, but that was a huge part for me, at least mentally, to get the energy and the motivation to want to dive into some of those deeper parts of healing and looking for the things, well, what can I do to optimize instead of feeling defeated or feeling like a victim? And they're two very different mentalities. So I would do that almost every day, calling that in, bringing in that energy to myself. And I would also journal about it. I believe that my body is capable. My body is strong. My body can heal. I believe in these ovaries. Like, let's go, just trying to bring in as much of that life force as possible. I think that has made the biggest difference over time. If you're curious about learning more about this, a lot of this work is explained in Dr. Joe Dispenza, where he's this medical doctor, but he has all these experiences and he runs these big conferences and he has books that you can look up if you want on the power of belief and how that actually changes your physical body, what you believe. And he has all these crazy stories. You can look it up about people healing from cancer and they have these diseases, and working on their headspace first helps them heal. Isn't that crazy? So I have read his books before. I knew going into that was a huge part of things. The energetics and your mentality behind things are huge, but calling in that healing, calling in the trust. There's also a great book out there if you are in this season and it's specifically about fertility and you're trying to get pregnant or can't, or you're coming across some bumps in the road, there's this book called Spirit Babies, and it's just the most encouraging book to read about how our babies are out there and they're ready and they're waiting for us. They're waiting for the perfect time. And it's about establishing that trust in your life path, in how these babies are going to come to you, however that looks. It was so encouraging to me at that time. So just surrounding myself with positivity and with stories of people getting pregnant with PCOS. And I had to really dig, which is also one of the reasons why I want to share this episode, is that I hope that this can be encouragement, even if your symptoms are totally different, or maybe if you're struggling with something completely different with your health. But this process of healing, like both the mental parts and the physical parts together, I hope that it can serve as an example that it is possible, right? So that was the belief side of things. The second thing that I did and started to really shift that was PCOS specific was shifting my workouts. Before this, I was doing a lot more high intensity training. Like it was at least 30 minutes on a spin bike every day, or it was doing kind of something like a HIIT workout or something intense, because that was what helped me get energy for the day. And it felt so good to sweat. And it was just like, it felt so good. So how would I think that it was possibly bad? But the more I started to dig in and learn about hormonal health, that can be way too stressful on our bodies, on our adrenals, on our cortisol. And I wanted to do everything possible, right? So I'm like, oh my gosh, am I willing to give up this feeling of those endorphins that you get when you do one of those great energizing workouts and start to switch to more yoga, more Pilates, more walking, and then more strength workouts? There's such a tender balance, I think, with women's hormones. And we have been trained to work out just like men do, but it's actually so different what we need, especially when it comes to hormones. When I was younger, it didn't really matter to me what my hormones were doing because they were normal and it felt fine. Everything was fine. But then having something like this, I was like, okay, I could try it and see, maybe I can still get that same feeling of energy and mood boosting. And you know what? It did feel different. And I don't think that I loved the feeling of just doing more low impact. I didn't take away the high impact. I did it maybe 2 or 3 times a week instead of 5 or 6 days a week. And instead of 30 minutes, I did more like 20 minutes at a time and mixed in lighter rides. I wasn't like in a studio with the music pumping and all that intensity, but trying to bring it down a notch, thinking about more balance and of wanting to be a little bit more at ease and peaceful in my body, not trying to make it do crazy things. The next thing that I focused on was digestion. And I talked about this in the previous episode of the types of food and all the higher fiber foods and incorporating a lot more magnesium because that can help with your digestion. And in the past, I had also, right before this, had just finished healing SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which, yes, I will do an episode on that too. But I had just come out of this season of healing and it felt like I was going right back in. And so digestion had been a big part of that for me. And I knew how much digestion was tied to hormonal function and how our body can really excrete the excess hormones it doesn't need. So I amped it up. And this is so funny. I'm telling you this on air, but along with things like fiber and doing higher doses of magnesium, I also did colonics. I was down to do anything that was natural and somewhat accessible and easy to do because I was so committed. I want to make sure I'm covering all these bases before I go look at what the other options are if this doesn't work. I just wanted to know for myself. I probably would always regret it if I didn't do that deep dive and cover all the bases, but that is what I did. And then after a while, the colonics, I was like, this is getting a little pricey. Then one of my good friends started telling me about doing enemas, which you can do at home. And so that was a part of my healing process. Healing your digestive tract, healing your gut is so, so deeply connected. And I feel like I had a little bit of a head start with healing as I dealt with SIBO before that. You guys are going to be like, oh my God, this girl's crazy. There's always something. But I am happy to say, I feel like since healing PCOS before I got pregnant with my kids, that I haven't had anything since. That's not to say something won't come up, but I think that was an intense time of life. I'll just say that. And It's sort of the same process. Anything that you're trying to heal, looking at all the components of what are big levers here to pull, what are big factors that impact this the most. So the next one was blood sugar. And I know that we've talked about this before, but specifically with PCOS, blood sugar is a huge connector. And to me, this never really felt relevant because I was never pre-diabetic. I never had a lot of excess weight. I just never resonated with it. But I think as I dug a little bit closer, I became even more intentional about my blood sugar. Even though I ate real food and I was eating good protein and healthy fat, but just becoming a little bit more aware of those things and incorporated in every meal and meals instead of snacking through the day. And even things like a glass of wine at night, a glass of wine turns immediately to sugar. So I made a couple of switches of bringing the alcohol down where it was maybe, twice or 3 times a week. And remember, I was still in that phase of all my friends are still doing that nightly. And so choosing my events and choosing the times that I did a little bit more closely. And I made the switch to more clean cocktails. So just a tequila, soda, and lime, or a skinny margarita, or a gin and soda, splash of tonic, just doing those because there's less sugar. So I became a little bit interested in sugars itself. If I wanted a dessert, it would probably be a dessert that was sugar and fat together. So something like ice cream, because it has the fat from the milk. Dark chocolate has a lot of fat from the cocoa bean, and getting away from things that were maybe spiking my blood sugar. So things like that, I just became extra aware of. And I do think that it is a huge part of classic PCOS type diagnosis, where if there's a lot of sugars or sodas or candies or things that are bringing your blood sugar up and then dropping you back down, and you're hungry all the time and you're starving, and it's that feeling of being a little bit unsteady throughout the day, that is a huge part of it. So definitely start with real food. We have a bunch of episodes on how to make that transition to real food. That will naturally start to balance your blood sugar, but then there's levels to it. Like, you can always get a little bit better, a little bit more mindful about it. I did also track my cycle in an app. I think I've used Glow and Flow in the past. And along with that, I did start doing the ovulation strip testing because I just wanted to know and pick up on patterns. This is kind of about becoming your own scientist for your own body. You're like, I want to know what's going on. I would keep track of it in the notes on my phone so I could share it with my naturopath. This is how long each cycle was. Here's what I did differently that month, whether it was playing with the workouts or it was thinking more about the blood sugar or focusing more on digestion, of seeing the inputs and then the output of that and giving myself time. Like, I wanted to track for 4 months and just see what the info was saying so that it was easy to figure out maybe what the next steps would be. Another thing I did was a few different supplements that really helped. One was doing spirulina every day. That's a powder, and I would put it in my green smoothie. I think that's the easiest way to probably take it. They also make it in capsules that you can just swallow. It is a little bit of a algae flavor or taste, so it's not always for everybody, especially if you're coming off food that's not necessarily real food. So just know that ahead of time. But that is so rich in minerals, so rich in iron, so rich in calcium, and all the elements that we need for our hormones to be functioning well, and especially for fertility. I took a prenatal. I took the brand Seeking Health, which is one of my favorite companies. They do such a great job of sourcing so well. And the types of different vitamins that they're putting in and how they're formulated, it needed to be methylated, like forms of folate, methylated forms of B. Because I knew that I had the MTHFR gene mutation. So that's just a very important thing, I think, probably for all women. If you're trying to get pregnant, make sure your vitamins or prenatals are methylated, because even if you don't have that gene mutation, it's still a healthy form to take. Whereas if you don't know if you have that gene mutation or not, and you're taking a prenatal that does not have methylated vitamins, it can cause some issues, and even has been linked to miscarriages and your body not having enough folate or B vitamins, which are very key in terms of getting pregnant. So the next thing that I took was a supplement called inositol. So it's INNOSITOL. And it's this powder, and it's actually a little sweet that you take, I think it was 2 or 3 times a day, and you just mix it in water. And this is a very little known supplement that can help naturally balance blood sugar. So coming back to that conversation, like any things I could do to help support that, cinnamon is also great. So I'm putting cinnamon in my matcha and cinnamon in basically anything, cinnamon in my smoothies. But inositol was really helpful. And I took that for a long time. I want to say like a year. And when it came to actually trying to get pregnant, I'm just including this supplement in this, even though that was a little bit further down the road. Chaste tree berry extract. It's a tincture that you can taste. It tastes horrible. But in the case of PCOS with longer cycles, it's something about that tincture helps extend the window so that there's enough time for implantation and that your cycle is not coming 6 days later. That was something that was slowly dosed, and you can talk to your naturopath, and please do before taking anything, because there are some counter indications for these things, even though they're natural. But that chaste tree berry extract is a mouthful, was specifically dosed. I forget the exact, but it has to be at a certain specific time in your cycle when you are currently trying to get pregnant. Okay. Here's where things get weird. Are you ready for this part? That along with this belief in healing, that I also had to take a very honest look about my energy. And here's what I mean. I don't mean like energy in your day. I mean the energy that you're operating from. And every person, this has nothing to do with gender, but every person has a balance of what is known as masculine energy and feminine energy. And the masculine energy is really what is prized in our culture, in our society, and is all about productivity and efficiency and how much can you get done and being the most super capable human on the planet. And you get up early and you do your workout and you hit all these things, and it's very high energy, high output. It's very dominant. It's very forceful. Like you are just getting stuff done. Serious, high focus. That is the masculine energy. The feminine energy on the other side is not as well known or talked about because it is not as prized to be that way when we think about just in general the ways that we're taught, the ways that we're modeled, the ways that we're told here's how to be successful. So the feminine energy is much more receptive, and it's much more about receiving. It's about tending. It's about growing. It's about slowing down. It's about being more intentional. It's about, tending and nurturing. And I only mention this part because I feel like for so many women, a lot of health problems are starting to come up, like whether it's fertility or something else, where it's this huge disconnect from our feminine side. We are all about being the most capable, the highest producers, getting the most done, that we forget that complete other side of ourselves that is more slow, is more nurturing and receiving and sitting back and taking things in and seeing the bigger picture of things. And every person has both of these energies, but I find, and for me specifically, that I was just dominating with my masculine energy all the time. And a huge part of that, yes, is running a business. Like I have to be in my masculine energy. When I'm running a team, I am the CEO of a business. There's so many things that we are producing and creating that require a lot of that structure and a lot of that intensity and a lot of that drive. And I think that's a beautiful thing, as long as you know when to tap into that and when you also can tap into the complete other energy, which is the feminine side. I share this because for me, that was true, although I didn't necessarily know it or I couldn't necessarily see it at the time, but I can see it now. Looking back, that I really had to spend some time working on my relationship to my feminine side and the feminine energy, and working on that it wasn't bad, that it was important, just as important to cultivate that feminine energy side of things as it was to be able to lead with the masculine side of things, knowing when in my life, which energy it required from me. And I was so bad at the feminine side of things. I am so much better now, to the point where I feel like I do actually lead with that side so much more, like most of the time, unless I'm sitting down, opening my computer, running our team meeting, thinking about things in a work sense, yes, but having the ability to tap into both sides when it's needed, because running on the masculine side, even for men all the time, will lead to burnout and adrenal fatigue and issues with cortisol and issues with digestion and issues with your hormones. And it is all connected. So the funny thing is, years later, I was doing PT after having kids and healing, is that I found out that the right side of the body is what is known as the masculine side, and the left side of the body is known as the feminine side. And where do you think those little polyps on my ovaries were? Right side or left side? They were on the right. That side was working so hard. And looking back, I'm not sure if there's anything I would do differently, because that was the time in my life when I was driving hard and going for it and starting my business and doing everything. I didn't have help. It was all hours of the day and I loved it and it was so much fun, and I don't think I'd change it. But I think when there is a different priority of like, wait, I want to think about my health in terms of longevity and fertility, and I want to think about growing a family, that energy shift was so required. I can see it now, so required to be able to tap into the feminine side in order to be a mother. And it would have felt so uncomfortable and so hard, I think, especially that postpartum season and becoming a mom, if I didn't have that practice in bringing in a little bit more of that feminine side and not always in every situation leading with that dominant masculine side. I know that may seem a little bit out there, but for me, that was such a huge connection piece. How am I just operating in my day, in my life? The way that I talk to myself, the way that I would really pride myself on doing it all and doing it all by myself and never asking for help. And that was not energy that was gonna work for motherhood. And it sure doesn't, let me tell you. So at least for me, these were the things that helped me make a shift. And if you do notice, the physical part of it, that was like the easy side. That was the stuff that was like, okay, I can easily incorporate a few more of these things. I can get supplements. That doesn't take a lot of time or energy to do. But it was the mental and the emotional, that belief that I could heal, really calling that in for myself and that deep trust in my body. And then also this switch of what energy am I walking through my day with right now? Really checking myself and really having to get honest about how much I was in that masculine side of things, that go-getter, hardcore, like just get it all done, do it all by myself energy. And I think the more that I started to incorporate being able to do and have both when needed, when the situation called for it, it just improved my health. Like the ability to heal and regulate your nervous system and have practices of releasing stress from your body and all the things that we carry, like that is the feminine side. And so it was a huge part for me in my own journey. And I hope that sharing this part of my story, these intricate details, is encouraging to hear and at least maybe gives you some other things to think about than what's typically held or typically known, especially when we're thinking about healing our hormones in any way, or if it's PCOS specific, that there are so many things that just are not talked about, but that I personally found helpful and maybe would be worth a try. If this episode was helpful for you, I'd love to know. It is the weirdest thing to be talking about it. But I will say, like, the end of the story is that within, I would say, 2 or 3 months of making these changes, I was able to get pregnant. So like very quickly. And I know that that's not everybody's journey, but that was true for me. And not only that, but holding the belief that having a baby could actually be healing for my body, and not having the belief of having a baby is going to wreck your hormones even further. Like, I will admit there was a tiny bit of me that was a little bit nervous of, okay, I'd done all this work to heal, to finally get pregnant. I was so sick during pregnancy. I was just out of it for 6 months on my back or throwing up. But that idea of that when your baby is born, it's a new version of yourself, and holding that energy too, and that vision of when I have a baby, it's going to heal my hormones and it's going to be a new version of me in a very healthy way. And I think that has 100% been the case. So much so that after Noah was born, I feel like I never had any issues with rebalancing hormones postpartum. then when I was ready to think about having another baby, that it didn't feel like an issue because all of these things were things I had practiced and done. It was very easy to tap back into things and incorporate some of these things that I had used in the past. And from the years from having Noah until now, he's almost 5. So I have had no hormonal issues, and it was very easy and like a non-event. When I was ready to get pregnant with June, we did within a couple months. I think all of these things were such huge lessons for me, and also lessons for motherhood that were kind of like a initiation. I can see that now. I can't always see that in the moment, but add that belief of you are birthing a new version of yourself when your kids are born, and really holding that belief, like, I believe my hormones can do it, that my body is smart, that she is so wise and so capable and knows exactly what to do if I give her the right foundation, the right ingredients, the right foods, the right sleep support, the right supplements, the right mentality, most of all. And I feel like out of anything else, that is the thing that has helped keep my body in balance. It's a little bit of all of those things all at once. So not a quick fix, because nothing ever is when you're doing something that actually is substantial and changes how you operate in your day-to-day life. But it is something that has worked, at least for me. And I have no idea if it will work for other people. Everybody's so different. Everybody's body's different. Everybody's hormones are different. Even the diagnosis of PCOS can mean so many different things, and you can have so many different symptoms. But that realization of is this something that I'm going to take on as my identity and walk around, that this is happening to me, or how can I take this and turn this into something that's happening for me? And I think for me, when I look back at this journey, that's really what it has been. So I hope that whatever stage of life that you are in, whatever season that you're looking at, that you just give yourself so much grace and love and gentleness. And I think that more than anything, more than the specific things that you try, just that very deep tending and caring to yourself on an energetic level, on a mental level, on an emotional level, on a physical level with your body is so important. And I think where it all starts. So I am just sending you so much love. If you are walking through this season or know somebody who is, I hope that this is encouraging to hear just an example of somebody who did heal and that it hasn't been an issue since. And that's really, really what I hope for you too. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for being here, for listening to my rambling stories. And I hope that you will send this to somebody that you love or may be going through this season of life as well. If you enjoyed this episode and want more like it, make sure you're subscribed to the Simply Real Life podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and maybe share it with a friend or two. That would mean the world.